Here we go.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to one of our feedback sessions that we're holding with the residents of Durham about the upcoming search for the next Durham police chief. I would like to first hand over the call to our Spanish interpreters so that they can introduce themselves and give instructions to our Spanish-speaking residents on how they can participate in this session.
Buenas tardes a todos. Bienvenidos a una de nuestras sesiones de retroalimentación que estamos llevando a cabo con los residentes de Durham sobre la búsqueda para el siguiente jefe de policías de Durham. Primero vamos a tener la introducción a la interpretación para las personas que hablan español. Como verán, los organizadores de este evento tienen la firme determinación de facilitar la comunicación bilingüe en la reunión de hoy. Mi nombre es Mojde y mi cointérprete hoy es Susan y estamos representando a la Cooperativa de Justicia del Lenguaje Tilde. Estaremos ofreciendo interpretación simultánea inglés-español, español-inglés. Good evening, everybody. As you've seen, the organizers of this event are firmly committed to facilitating bilingual communication in today's meeting. My name is Mojde, my co-interpreter is Susan, and we're representing the Tilde Language Justice Cooperative. We'll be providing English-Spanish and Spanish-English simultaneous interpretation. Si usted se unió a la reunión usando su teléfono, por favor, asegúrese de entrar con el app de Zoom para poder acceder a la función de interpretación. Esta función no está disponible en los Chromebook. If you joined on your phone, please make sure to join on your Zoom app so that you can access the interpretation function. Please note that this is not available to Chromebook users. Si usted no es bilingüe, puede seleccionar su canal de idioma yendo abajo a la derecha en el globito o los tres puntitos si está conectado por teléfono. Haga clic en el botón de interpretación, seleccione español y luego picarle en Done o finalizar. If you're not bilingual, please select your language channel by going to the bottom right, click on interpretation, it's a globe or three dots if you're connected by phone, select English and click done at the end. It's important for you to activate this option if you're not bilingual since some participants will be speaking in Spanish. Algunas pautas para crear un espacio multilingüe, a few guidelines for creating multilingual spaces. Por favor, no hablen muy rápido. También si no están hablando, por favor pongan su audio en silencio. Please don't speak fast. And if you're not speaking, please mute yourself. Por último, les vamos a recordar que por favor hablen una persona a la vez y en un idioma por oración. Lastly, we remind you to please speak one person at a time and with one language per sentence. Estos espacios se crean con el apoyo de todos. Por favor, comunique cualquier problema por la ventana de chat o habilitando su micrófono. We create these spaces with everyone's support, so please communicate any issues by chat or by turning on your volume. Thank you for creating this multilingual space.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And as I said earlier, this is one of our feedback sessions we are holding with the residents of Durham. About the search for the next Durham police chief, we have another one that is scheduled for tomorrow, May 26th at 1 p.m. Several years ago, we conducted a similar feedback session during our search for our current police chief, Chief Davis. Chief Davis has done a great job here in Durham, and as she moves on, we will have some big shoes to fill. And I said that we did a similar feedback session in the past. And back then we had a physical public meetings. But in our situation has changed quite a bit. And for safety reasons and due to COVID, we are conducting these sessions in a virtual environment. Before I introduce our search team that will be facilitating this feedback session, I want to make everyone aware that there are several ways to provide your feedback. We have a website that provides a survey that you can fill out. These surveys are in both English and Spanish and will remain open and able to collect resident feedback until June 15th. The specific website will be put into the chat feature shortly. There is also a phone number that you can call and leave any feedback. That phone number will also be put into the chat feature, and the number is 919-560-4273. That number again, 919-560-4273. Both the survey feedback and the phone feedback will be collected and reviewed by the search firm that is conducting our search, Developmental Associates. I strongly recommend that using these alternative methods of giving your feedback, as we have limited time during this session. This session will be open for 1 hour and 30 minutes, and in order to give as many residents as we can the opportunity to speak, we will be limiting the time for each speaker to 2 minutes. So please provide your input as succinctly as possible, and know that we have other avenues in which you can provide your feedback. Please know that if any inappropriate or offensive language is used, that participant will be blocked. When someone is speaking, I will let you know when you have 10 seconds left in your time so that you can complete any final thoughts. To speak and provide your feedback to the search firm, please put your name into the chat feature. Make sure that the name in the chat feature is the same that you have on your screen. Sometimes they are different. The chat feature is the icon at the bottom that looks like a word bubble on the bottom of your screen. And we will then call your name, and you will need to unmute your line so that you can be heard by all. Now I would like to introduce our facilitator from the executive search firm, Developmental Associates. Please welcome Dr. Stephen Strauss, who will give you all some information on his organization and give you further details on the information and feedback they are seeking. Dr. Strauss?
Thank you so much, Jim. Yes, Developmental Associates is a local firm. We work throughout the state of North Carolina and the Southeast, working particularly with local governments and other organizations with a mission, such as universities and nonprofits, to try to help them find executives. I want to introduce our team that will be working, actually taking the lead today. First of all, Pat Bazemore is the retired police chief from the town of Cary. Pat is the first was the first female chief of a large municipality in North Carolina. Also, Kerr Putney, who recently retired as a Charlotte-Mecklenburg police chief. He was the second African-American chief to lead the Charlotte-Mecklenburg police force. They're both going to be facilitating the session, and they're going to be asking questions and taking notes and so forth. But I wanted to start off by giving you just an overview of our process. Yes, 5 years ago, we worked with the city of Durham to help find C.J. Davis as your police chief. Things have changed dramatically since then. Not only in terms of running virtual meetings like this, but the whole nature and the sense, community sense of what law enforcement is all about is changing dramatically. We are in the midst of that change. It's very hard to figure out exactly where that's going to come out. This is, again, a time of a lot of turmoil in the profession and in communities. And not to be forgotten is that this is the 1-year anniversary of the George Floyd incident. And we're all taking that very much to heart. So we understand, and the City Council recognizes that there's a new paradigm now for law enforcement. And we want to understand where the community is with respect to those issues so that we can do the best job we can in terms of a search process for this position. So let me describe it very briefly to you. Based on the input that we receive from the community, we will be, and the input we've gotten from a variety of stakeholders, including the police department, the council, the managers, we will be designing a recruitment, screening, and assessment process. We'll begin recruiting probably in about a week to 10 days once we're able to get all the input together and finalize a job ad. We'll recruit using 4 methods. We'll search out individuals that we think would be good candidates for the position. A second method we'll use is there's some listservs that involve a lot of police chiefs and police executives across the region and the country. We want to get engaged with those. We'll use social media. And we will also post the job ad on a variety of professional websites, including, for example, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and there are a variety of other organizations that particularly will enable us to get a diverse pool of candidates. We'll recruit again for about 30 days. We will then put that information together, share that, who are the applicants, and what are their credentials with the city manager's team. We will ask them to reduce the number of candidates down to no more than 15. We do not make any decisions in this process. We simply try to provide the best information possible to the decision makers, who are the manager and her team. And they will identify up to 15 candidates. Those folks will then go through an intensive screening process that includes two particular methods. One, a structured telephone interview that will involve structured questions, structured rating criteria. We will also have the candidates answer some electronic questions, short essay types of questions as well. Based on that information, which will take us about 2 weeks, we'll meet again with the manager and her team. We'll ask them to reduce the number of candidates down to 5. Then we will develop what is called a skills assessment, where we will have the candidates go through a variety of exercises that simulate the kinds of things they would be doing as police chief. And I want to talk a little bit about why we use this approach. The traditional hiring approach relies simply on an interview. Sometimes it's coupled with a public presentation. There's a significant problem with simply relying on that approach only. We believe in interviews. We're using it for screening. The city manager is definitely, after we've run our process, is going to narrow the number of candidates down to 2 or 3. Those folks will then be interviewed and also appear before the public and have the public have an opportunity to ask them questions and respond. So interviews and public presentations are part of our process, but we add another stage, and that is skills assessment. And the reason we do that is we want to get beyond what a candidate knows and how well they communicate and their charisma and their judgment, which is what you can assess in an interview or in a presentation. You cannot find out, the way I always like to put it, you can hear in an interview, you can understand the talk of a candidate. That doesn't mean they walk the same way. And we want to see what their skill set is. And we can assess that by using a variety of exercises that simulate what it takes to do the job. Just as an example, 5 years ago when we ran our process, that doesn't mean this is what we'll do today, because we're again going to base our process on what we learned. But 5 years ago, we had a mock press conference where the chief had to deal with a major community event and develop responses to that, and also get interviewed by folks acting as the media, asking the candidates questions about during the event and after. We also had all the candidates do a presentation. I'm sorry, not a presentation. That was essentially the presentation. We also had them running a community meeting. By the way, some of the issues that came up in the community meeting were issues that we heard about during our sessions 5 years ago with the public. So for example, there were some folks who didn't want the police in their community at all or didn't trust the police. We built that into our exercise. They actually had to meet with folks acting as community representatives and put together a plan with them for how they were going to respond to those key community issues. We also had them carry out a coaching role play. Obviously, this may not be quite as important to the community, but we want to make sure that they can manage their staff effectively. And so we had an interaction with someone acting as a deputy chief whose performance wasn't what it needed to be. And we saw how they could work out those issues with that person. And then last of all, we had them put together a written plan. We carry out these exercises. What we did 5 years ago is we had a combination of some community folks, as well as law enforcement executives, and also a few folks that were city administrators. We trained all those folks. We have about 3 to 5 folks per exercise. We train them for a half a day before they begin seeing the candidates. We train them not only on how to run their exercise, but also on how to rate candidates objectively based on predetermined criteria, which again are determined by what we hear in our focus groups and our community sessions. They then assess 5 candidates, and they will then meet with the city manager and her team and provide them with feedback on how the candidates performed on all those exercises. We also have all the candidates take a psychological It's called the Emotional Intelligence Inventory. It assesses essentially leadership skills, like how they deal with people, how they problem solve, how they handle stress. And we cross-correlate what we learn about in those exercises with what we learn in the instrument. All intended to try to provide the best information to the manager and her team so they can make the most informed decision possible. So that's essentially our process. And I think at this point, we want to transition to getting input from you all. And so I'm going to turn it over to Pat and Kerr to get input from the public. So we're looking forward to hearing from you all. Thank you.
Before we start in, I do want to just reiterate how folks can submit their questions or provide their feedback. So again, please put your name into the chat feature, which is a bubble-shaped icon that is at the bottom of your screen. And again, please put your name and make sure that the name that you put into the chat feature is also the name that is on your screen so that we can identify you. We will then call your name and we will then ask you to unmute yourself. And when you do, then your line can be heard.
Again, I'm Pat Bazemore with Developmental Associates. I will be recording the comments that you are making, and Kerr Putney is going to actually lead the initial part of the feedback session, so I will turn it over to him.
Good evening, everyone. Let's jump right into it. We want to hear from you what exactly you're looking for in your new police chief. Let's start by talking about specific challenges that you see and opportunities that you see for the new chief, and what particular skill set are you looking for? At this point, we'll open it up to responses from you.
Right now, I don't see any names that have been submitted. I'm sorry, we do have one name that just came in. Please, Mr. Larry Smith, if you could please, Amber, if you could move Larry Smith over to the microphone and unmute him.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah. Well, my name is Larry Smith, and I'm currently the spokesperson for the Durham County FOP, and I'm also a retired deputy chief from Durham. So I'm speaking on behalf of the Durham Fraternal Police, and one of the things that I think that the police department is really looking for is a chief that can come in and be an advocate, not just for the community. We know that community police relations go both ways. And so we're going to be looking for a chief who can come in and instill a sense of confidence in the officers and find the balance between supporting the officers in the job that they do in a very incredibly difficult environment right now for police and police administrators in particular, to find that balance between standing up and supporting their officers in the job they do and being an advocate for them, as well as challenging to the issues that are facing law enforcement today. And so that's one of the things that we would really like to see, and that chief, the new chief candidates, be questioned about that, is how will they find that balance? How do they intend to instill some confidence? Durham has a real struggle with recruiting right now. Staffing is way down, and as we have talked to officers who have left the Durham Police Department, it hasn't been as much about pay as it's been about support. And there's a lot of police departments here in the Triangle, and what's happening in Durham, we're hiring officers, we're giving them some of the best training in the state just to send them to other agencies. And we would really like to see that stop. We'd like to keep the good officers that we have and train and get good officers in to be able to increase recruiting. And that right now, that challenge for that chief is going to be to instill confidence that the department will support them when doing their job and doing it correctly.
Okay, thank you, sir. We did hear some of that from the session we had with the sworn personnel today as well. What are your other comments around challenges and opportunities and what you want to see in your next chief? Who's next?
We don't have any other names right now. Here we go. I think we have another one coming. No, at least for right now, we have no new names. Again, if anyone would like to provide their feedback directly to our consultants here, please just put your name in the chat feature and we will call on you. You will need to unmute yourself and then you can provide your feedback. Still don't see any names, but again, if you want to be called on, please put your name into the chat feature and we will call on you. Kerr, while we're waiting for someone, if I can ask you, I know obviously you and both Pat have held this exact, similar position in other municipalities here throughout the city. What sort of areas do you see being the most kind of critical for the next chief in a municipality the size of Durham?
Sure, Jim, I'll start and pass it over to Pat for her perspective. I think mainly it's just a change in environment right now. I mean, the level of accountability expected of officers, the great responsibility they have, also the advent of camera phones, smartphones, so that everything can be recorded. I think I've always encouraged people to use those tools of smartphones because it's easier to present and apply and allow for accountability when you have those interactions recorded. But mainly I see chief as needing to be innovative, needing to be creative, needing to be a person of the people, engaging, as I know Chief Davis did with the community, hearing all voices and allowing for all sides of every conversation and debate to be heard so that the next chief, he or she, can continue along those lines in improving the relationships and building that trust and legitimacy that we all have come to expect of our police and our police officers. Anything from you, Pat?
I would just say one of the things, to concur with what Chief Putney has said, I would say that being accountable and being present is particularly important. Being accountable both internally and also to the community and to the city leaders. And that's that's a huge responsibility for a police chief, and especially when you sometimes can be pulled in all different directions, but the support internally and in the community is extremely important.
How would you approach such change? I mean, as Dr. Strauss mentioned earlier, the political environment, the sort of environment that we live in right now is very sometimes always not overly friendly to the police force, et cetera. I mean, how does systematic change happen within the police force?
I believe it starts with listening. I believe you have to have your finger on the pulse. You have to have a deep understanding. What I like about the way Developmental Associates goes about our business is we're going to create a profile that obviously gives information about of Durham and of Durham Police Department, building the specific expectations. We've heard from officers, the executive team and also the first line leadership today. We're going to hear from officers and civilians over the next couple of days, but making sure you hear all sides and the expectations. Coming in to a new department, if it's not someone from within, you're going to need to really get an understanding of that culture, but more importantly, balance the needs of your elected officials with your community leadership and truly the cops. It's not an easy job. If it were easy, everybody would do it and do it well. But it's a job that I think Durham expects to see of that next chief coming in after a dynamic chief like Chief Davis, fulfilling some of the initiatives that have been started and being innovative, creating some more that continue to build that trust with the communities, especially those who are underserved. I think that's key, Jim.
And I agree, trust is critical. Pat, what are your thoughts about sort of instituting change within the department?
I think that, again, you have to be engaged. You have to engage the community. What is it that the community needs, wants, and expects from your police department? That's what we're there for, is to serve our community, serve and protect. And then to, as Chief Putney said, listening to everyone, all of your stakeholders. What one particular group may need, it may be very different than what another group needs, and to be able to formulate plans that will allow you to be responsive to the needs of all the community is extremely important. And again, once developing those expectations and holding your officers accountable for what they do and what you expect them to do and how you expect them to respond to situations is extremely important.
We did get a question in the chat that asked, they'd like to see a chief that is willing to create an advisory board or boards that represent the entire community. This could include having representation from officers in the department. I guess how have both of you seen that instituted at other municipalities?
I'll tell you, Jim, I think that is indeed how you achieve the expectations in 21st century policing. You have to have your advisors who are going to give you the feedback internally, who also help you chart the course. I don't think it's reasonable to expect a chief who comes in having all the answers, which is why you got to understand the specific culture of any agency and the city in which you're serving. But that is making sure you come in and create an external advisor as well. Stakeholders who are committed to the community, who've been there, who have roots there, and who can help you understand what the expectations are across the entire city. The only way to get that type of information is having the people there who have the information within the organization and without, establishing those relationships and giving them the opportunity to talk freely. Not only be heard, though, those things that make sense for an organization in a city have to be acted on as well.
And Pat, what were your thoughts on advisory boards?
Sorry, I'm typing as well. So I do believe that having the advisory boards, obviously people have different opinions and different ideas about what they need or what they want. And as police chiefs, we do not always understand. We may think that we understand what our community wants or what our department personnel need, but giving people an opportunity to be heard, to have input, I think it also allows us to think about things in a different way than we may think we know what they want, but I can tell you there have often been times as a police chief that I thought I knew what a community want. When I went out and spoke with them and heard what they want, it was very different from what I thought they needed. So I do think it's extremely important to have that input from every aspect of the community and internally.
Just so that everybody knows, again, if indeed you have a comment or you'd like to present your feedback, please just put your name into the chat feature. I know that another person had put as a comment that they would like to see a safe city, and that sort of is obviously a broad term as far as Durham being wanting to be a more of a safe city. Mr. Putney, you had mentioned sort of in relation to the advisory boards, how do you communicate with those advisory boards to sort of promote what's best for everybody, to sort of include as many diverse groups within Durham as possible?
It depends, Jim. My experience has been I had some official advisory a board, had a cross section of people from all walks of life who would come and we'd meet quarterly. And another opportunity, though, is those informal, credible, again, people who have roots there in Durham, to listen, hear them out in official and unofficial conversations, so that you really understand what's really going on and what the needs are. And it's gonna vary, but internally as well, you got to hear not just from your executive staff, but you got to hear from your command. You got to hear from your corporals, your sergeants, and you got to hear from your civilians and your officers. So it's going to be a very diverse group, a dynamic group. It's got to be of all ranks. It's got to be across the entire organization as well as across the entire community. It's hard to meet with everybody who lives in the community, but you know who your credible leaders are. That is job one of any new chief, finding out who those people are, establishing those relationships, and committing to affecting the change that needs to happen, and building on the many successes that you've already experienced there in Durham, with Durham PD in particular.
Now, I know there was some comments, I think earlier in the week, about the survey that we have that's on the city's website. I believe we're going to put that link into the chat as well, so that people can provide their feedback through the survey. But one of the issues that came up was that the issue of gun violence was not listed as specifically as one of the things on that survey as a top concern to people in Durham. Clearly, it goes sometimes hand in hand with violent crime and some other, gang issues, et cetera. I guess, was there any, and I don't know, Pat or Kerr, if you were involved in setting up those questions for the survey, but I guess what were your thoughts on how to address gun violence in particular within Durham?
Again, Jim, not to disclose everything that was said, but our session's already internally. A lot of our young people, young leaders there in the organization have some good ideas. I think, though, you have to blend those ideas for how you go about enforcing laws around gun violence with how you compassionately connect with your community, so you're being strategic in the exact people that you should focus on. It's a lot of people who are innocently going about their lives, and that does not build the trust that we need in policing. So got to strategic internally and externally, but you also got to listen to people who are where the rubber meets the road. There are a lot of innovative ideas that I heard today, in particular about violent crime. But the other thing is officers get frustrated when they don't hear directly from community members about addressing those things. It's a difficult situation. Nobody wants to be ostracized or attacked, but establishing those channels of communication. So when you're going out to direct officers to do work as a chief, you have the confidence that the community wants the type of work that you're doing, and then it's going to get your outcome to truly reduce the violence, not just create more issues that you have to deal with as you potentially harm relationships.
Mr. O'Donnell, I believe we have comments in the chat session. I don't know if you want to address those next.
Yes, that would be great. So I know one of the questions that came in was about having or hoping to see a chief who believes in that Black Lives Matter, embracing change, as well as being able to and being prepared to address concerns about in the media and in the press. It is sometimes listed as bad apples within the department. So again, that is more of a comment than some feedback, but clearly, it is an issue that needs to be addressed and discussed within the department. Any particular feedback from either of you?
Yeah, no surprises at all. I think if you were to survey virtually any community across the state, across the country, even, you're going to hear that very thing. What struck me too was the culture change, and talking about really understanding what that looks like. I would really encourage the new chief to really dig into that. I keep mentioning culture, but as we all know, culture at the end of the day is going to be more important than even the strategy that you employ, even your philosophy. If you don't have a strong culture, and that culture change is making that connection with people so that ideally your next chief makes the term Black Lives Matter irrelevant. It should be a foregone conclusion. And it's a tough conversation. It is. But you need somebody who's going to be courageous enough to have that conversation on a general and do it genuinely, and not just a check the box conversation, but something that demonstrates that you care about everybody that you're going to serve. So I think it's a very reasonable request, and I'd be surprised if that was a request that you'd hear in any city, anywhere across. Anything, Pat?
I will say that when I was in Cary, I started a program with building bridges and engaged the African American faith-based community. People, I was absolutely amazed at how many people came into the department, how many people we were able to connect with, and started a program that has gone across the country for how to engage with the underserved in our community and to really listen to what they have to say. And sometimes because we don't give people a voice, we don't hear what they have to say. And when we don't listen to people, then they put us in a situation that they're going to be heard, they need to be heard. So giving people a voice, giving people the opportunity to be heard, and then be responsive to what they're saying. I will tell you that I worked on a board with the state training and standards for the state to come up with a process that we could eliminate bad officers being able to go from one department to another department. And it takes a lot. It takes chiefs standing up and coming forward and saying, this is not acceptable behavior, and pass that information along to other departments so that we don't end up we don't have gypsy cops that are going from one department to the next. And again, as Chief Putney said, being courageous, you have to be, as the police chief, you have to be courageous enough to make those decisions to not allow those officers that are not do not embrace the culture of the department and do not serve and protect the community. And again, all aspects of the community, everyone deserves to be protected. They deserve to be heard. And the way we as leaders put those expectations out there makes a huge difference in how our officers respond. And then when they do not respond in the way that they're expected to, then we need to hold them accountable.
Thank you. Another comment has come through about the basic law enforcement training. The comment was that it basically is the same as it was back when this person went through it 30 years ago. I guess, how important is it to you both? And their recommendation is that the chief needs to understand the needs and a willingness that reflects the 21st century and strategies from academia. Especially when it comes to communication skills, emotional intelligence, et cetera. In other words, break the mold of teaching law enforcement in the same manner and be open to other tools and experts who can offer strategies that meet the needs of today's communities. Any thoughts, any feedback on that?
Without a doubt, I think even further, more than just understanding the 21st century 6 pillars, you need to apply them. You need to measure you and yourself and your organization against those pillars, because that is the future of policing. And the other piece of that is, and it goes back, Jim, to the conversation we had earlier about your internal and external advisory councils. Then get the feedback from both of those organizations, both of those entities, all stakeholders that are members there, and then asking your community. I think the biggest takeaway from those pillars in 21st century policing in the first place is around that trust and legitimacy. It starts there. And from there, you just because the basic law enforcement training, it lags behind, I think, some of the innovative departments across the state does not mean you can't enhance your own training in your own organization. There's opportunities to have additional training and the way you deliver it. I think that's another important part that's been touched on. Instead of just generally lecture format, you have to have hands-on because most of the cops are going to be bodily kinesthetic learners, and you have to challenge them around their emotional development as well as their physical development when they're new officers. And then you allow your best of the best train those new cops. I think, though, the foundation and the application of 21st century policing philosophies is really what's going to make the difference in your new chief coming in, doing what they need to do in Durham.
Well, I can tell you the VLET training has changed significantly since I went through 35 years ago. And again, serving on training standards, and we are constantly, training standards is constantly looking for the training that's needed and how training needs to adapt to meet the needs of the community. I will say that, as Chief Putney said, bringing training, VLET is just the beginning of your law enforcement training. You have to have consistent training throughout the years. You can't just get your basic law enforcement training and then only your state mandated training. You need to bring those new techniques and those new philosophies into your department and let the experts that do know those bring them in and teach your folks. One of the things that I can say that we have heard a lot from the internal Durham Police Department is because they are so short-staffed right now that it's all they can do to cover their shifts. They don't have the opportunity to engage in the extra training that they need in order to be the best police officers they can be to meet the demands of the community. Or I don't know if you want to reflect on that at all.
I think you covered it well. Again, the state BLET is the basic, and that's exactly what it is. It gives you that foundation. I do think reviewing the manner in which you're training, especially in-house, and I can't say that enough because that gives you a lot of flexibility. It makes you target the needs directly to your community. And what we would do also in the past is we'd have community members become a part of that training ongoing, be it your cultural diversity or your training around just dealing with different populations. Therefore, you're having a specific influence that is yours and yours alone, that's building upon the basis of basic law enforcement training that everybody.
Okay. Thank you very much. I know there was a comment about whether or not we would in part of the process, whether or not the community will be able to meet with and address the final candidates. I know and I saw Dr. Strauss, she just got on. By all means, go ahead and chime in.
Yes, that is what occurred last time. It was the city narrowed their candidates down to 2. And those folks did a press conference, did public forums, met with the police department and so forth. Whereas we have not fully designed that stage of the process, that is something that the city manager wants to do. We just haven't worked out all the details, but there will certainly be an opportunity for the public to meet the final, not just the final candidate, but certainly the final 2 or 3, I'm sure.
All right, thank you. There was a question in the chat about any sort of upcoming issues that you might assume would come out of or be, I guess, be created by the growth that we're seeing, in particular with things like Apple and Google jobs coming, and whether or not that new influx of people and money and jobs, what challenges might that create for the new chief of police?
I would say that some of those challenges are these are people that are coming into technology jobs, and they're high paying jobs, and they are going to want to be in a community where they feel safe. not just that they are safe, they need to feel safe. And when you are constantly seeing in the media issues about the violent crime increasing, and you see the constant stories of drive-by shootings and innocent people, innocent bystanders being taken in, being hurt in those drive-by shootings, those issues will not bring those people to Durham to live or to visit the community if they do not feel safe going there. So creating a community where people feel safe to live, work, play, and raise their children will be significant.
Okay, thank you. I'll say it again. If you have questions or if you'd like to be unmuted, we ask that you put your name into the chat feature and we will call on you. At that point, you will need to unmute yourself and we can hear your feedback. Let's see. One of the questions that also came up was about whether or not or how the information gained out of these question and answer periods or these feedback sessions. And I know Dr. Strauss, it maybe is more specific to you, but how will this information be incorporated into the overall structure of the search and of the assessment centers?
Well, I gave an example a little while ago. I mean, we want to know, in fact, all of our job ads include, here are the major challenges that the next, in this case, police chief will be addressing. We give them information about the community. We give them information about the department. We identify competencies based on what we learned from these focus group sessions. We identify the top priorities that are anticipated that the next chief will need to be addressing. And as I mentioned earlier, we design them into our exercises. For the example I gave a little while ago was a community meeting where that represented a lot of what we heard from community members, which was 5 years ago, which was some of them didn't even want the police in their community or did not trust the police. And we built that into the exercise so that candidates don't just talk about it, they actually had to deal with it. And so we get an opportunity to directly view their competencies when they're dealing with differences of opinion, lack of trust, and so forth.
Great, thank you. Let's see. So we still are not getting any brave souls who might come to the microphone. And I'd hate to hear myself keep talking. Are there any other folks out there who would like to address our development associates representatives?
So while we're waiting, Mr. O'Donnell, I'd like to just say that it would be very nice for us in meeting the needs of the community if we could hear from the community members for what it is that's important to them. Sometimes we hear from the most vocal people in the community, but we don't hear from the people that they may have concerns or issues, but they don't want to come forward. And we do have those folks for them to go and fill out the surveys, provide us with that information so that we can make sure we are looking for the right person to come into Durham as your police chief and to meet the needs of all the community.
Thank you. Let's see. Are there any other comments or chats that are coming through? And I don't see anything right now. All right. Well, we don't have any specific information. I know it was brought up earlier about the staffing and some sort of filling of open positions and the sort of stress that can put the department under. If either one of you could sort of express a little bit of your own experience, I guess, in how you've managed staffing issues in your own departments.
I'll tell you, that is, it's a big concern right now. Our sessions today, they were very telling. it's on the forefront of everybody's mind. Recruitment and retention, getting the right people and getting enough of them to meet the needs of a community. And they were throwing out some great ideas about even the shift, adjustments to shifts, which I know sometimes feels taboo, but it gives people the opportunity, even with a lesser amount, to have the opportunity for a work-life balance. We about that. And obviously everybody knows that that impacts morale, but it also impacts officers, not just physically, but emotionally. You can't perform your best. You can't meet the demands of the community that you serve if you're exhausted. So there's some innovative ways. When the new chief comes in and starts to talk to his or her people, innovative ways to look at how officers in patrol are deployed, taking a look at that shift work, and also though being able to have the community celebrate the positive that is going on in that area. I mean, sometimes community members are the best advocates for a police department, make that whole city a more inviting place. And the way the Chief Davis handled a lot of the unrest and the pandemic last year is amazing. It is deserving of applause and applaud. And I think the citizens of Durham need to celebrate those kinds of successes so that they show that it's an inviting city that values the services of
I would say one of the pillars of 21st century policing is officer well-being. And again, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. And when officers are overworked, and what we understood today from quite a few of the feedback sessions was that the officers are being required to come back in on their days off and are being required to come back in 2 days of their days off. They're being required to be on call. They are having to come in for extra events. And there is not a work-life balance for them. And they're mentally exhausted, they're physically exhausted. And one of the things that they brought up is that when officers when they really are just exhausted, that we are putting them in situations where they may not make the best decisions. So truly taking care of the officers and making sure that they are fit for duty is extremely important. But you have to have, our primary response is 911 calls. So if we don't have enough personnel to go out and meet the needs of the community other than 911 response, then the community is going to continue to not meet those needs for people that want to be involved, they want to be engaged, but they are not they don't have emergency calls, or they're not having particular issues. They just would like to be engaged and would like to be involved with the police.
Thank you. Well, I know there were some comments that came in about, again, looking to add more officers and again, the staffing challenges that are within our own department as well as across the country. One question that did come in, or the feedback was that we need more police to be engaged with the community and not just patrolling the streets. I guess, what are your thoughts on, and it sometimes is kind of a throwaway term of, oh, well, community engagement. How do you make that real?
Quite simply, Jim, it has to be a part of your culture and truly your philosophy. You can't sacrifice that. It has to be a part of how you go about doing business. And I think your former chief laid the groundwork to do just that. But it harkens back to the question before. You can't have a lot of opportunity to freely engage if you're tied to the radio because you're so short. So recruiting, getting enough and enough well-trained and officers who are in this work for the right reasons is key. And the way to do that is to make this an appealing opportunity. Truthfully, those two issues are very intertwined.
I will also say that it's extremely important that as law enforcement that we're able to go to the community and not expect them to always come to us to build those relationships, because that's truly the key to success in anything is open communication and relationship building. And you need to build those relationships before you need the community or before the community needs you. So the relationship building, going to them as opposed to wanting them, expecting them to come to us is extremely important.
I know there was another comment in the chat feature about how we might get feedback and input from folks that aren't able to attend this video or Zoom call. So I do want to reiterate, we do have two surveys that you can log on to and complete and fill out your feedback and provide information on what you want in your next chief of police at Durham. Those surveys can be found on our website. That will be put in the chat, but it's on the city's website. There is also, for folks that may not have access to a computer, and if they, somehow are able to get this, they are able to call in, and we have a specific line at the City Hall telephone number for feedback on this search. The telephone number is 919-560-4273. That telephone number again, 919-560-4273. One other quick question is about whether or not, how would an internal candidate be considered? I know, again, I work in the Human Resources Department here at the City of Durham. Internal candidates are usually some of the best candidates that you can get. How would we address internal competition for this position?
We strongly encourage it in a couple of ways. Number one, all the candidates are assessed equally, just like an outsider or an internal person, all get assessed equally throughout the entire process. If an internal candidate makes it to the assessment center, they're evaluated just like anyone else. And it really provides an opportunity sometimes, because internal folks, sometimes their leadership does not emerge because they're being very loyal to their boss. And so those skills do not necessarily emerge to folks outside the department. And so having an opportunity to directly demonstrate those skills in a process like a skills assessment exercises really gives them an opportunity to step up and show what they can do. We've had that happen a number of times, not just in law enforcement, but for other positions like city manager and so forth. The other thing I would add is we also provide feedback to any internal candidate that goes through our process. We will give them feedback on what we saw as their strengths, what we observed as some areas for them to improve upon. If that happens to be at the assessment center, we actually provide them with the feedback that the assessors provided, as well as the results of the emotional intelligence inventory. And putting those two together really provides a really powerful tool for professional development. And the basic idea is, if the city wants to invest in this person and invest in their future. And so that's all built into the process to reinforce and support internal candidates.
Steve, I hate to put you on the spot here. Could you describe what emotional intelligence is a little bit? I think that's a fascinating term, and it's used more and more within recruitment. Tell us, I guess, how Developmental Associates handles emotional intelligence.
Yeah, we first of all, let me say what it is. It's essentially whenever you're hiring any person for any job, and I don't care what the job is, school teacher, whatever the position is, police officer, you're always concerned about two different sets of competencies, whether you're thinking about it this way or not. One, you want to make sure that the candidates have the technical capacity to do the job. And the other is you want to make sure they have the emotional intelligence to do the job. And emotional intelligence in this case, for example, in law, let me go back, technical competency in law enforcement. For example, I told you about an exercise we had last time, managing a press conference. Well, that is a very, very technical skill in order to be able to speak to a group, to present information, to answer questions, particularly a lot of technical questions where a police chief needs to know, is this information I should share legally or not? Are they aware of how they need to reinforce and support the community and so forth. So that is a very technical exercise. On the other hand, running a staff meeting really focuses a lot on emotional intelligence, or a coaching role play where they focuses more on emotional intelligence. And those competencies have to do with how the candidate problem solves, how they handle stress, how well do they handle conflict, what is their self-confidence, how much meaning do they get from their work, how do they interact with other people, do they engage, are they someone who is collaborative and a team player, or are they more of an autocrat? Those are all the various components of emotional intelligence. Essentially, the way I look at it is these, for an executive position like this, these are leadership competencies that are assessed. We assess them in two different ways. One is we have all the candidates, as I mentioned earlier, take a validated instrument called the EQ 2.0. It's validated for employment purposes. It has indicators in there, for example, to tell whether a candidate is being honest or not in their responses. And we also observe those competencies in our skills assessment. So, for example, in a coaching role play, we'll build in some conflict and see how the candidates resolve those conflicts. And then when that's over, we not only get feedback from assessors about how the candidate handled that conflict, but we cross-validate that with the results of the instrument, all of which is intended, again, to give the city two different data sources, of which typically both confirm one another. If they don't, that's another matter, but for the most part, they tend to confirm one another. And that can give the city a lot more confidence that what they observe from the candidate in these skill exercises is what they actually do on a day-to-day basis.
What do you mean by validated? Can you explain how that adds in?
You're really pushing me on this now.
I am. I apologize.
So there are actually two different definitions of validity in the process that we're recommending. One of those is what's called content validity, and that has to do with the exercises we design. Do they, in fact, represent the types of real-life situations that a chief would deal with? Again, like a press conference after a major incident, like running a community meeting, like managing a staff member whose performance isn't what it needs to be, putting together a plan for some sort of initiative in writing. These are all things that police chiefs do. And we would, so as a result, these, if they're designed appropriately, are content valid exercises. And by the way, also rating criteria that are based upon, again, what we learned from the public, the department and the management team with respect to the key competencies that this person needs. Just as an example, in this case, they really need to be a change agent, which is something that we weren't necessarily looking for last time, but that's just a representative of a key competency that has emerged over the last 4 or 5 years. The other definition of validity has to do with the test of emotional intelligence. That is done through statistical processes of administering the test, cross-correlating it with other validity factors and effectiveness of folks, for example, on the job and so forth. So that involves an in-depth statistical analysis that the publisher has to use to legitimate what they do. And it's and that's so as a result, it's a very in-depth statistical process.
Thank you. If there are any other feedback or any other comments that anyone would like to make, by all means, please either put them in the chat and we will call on you, or we will express them, if they're in the chat and you wish not to speak, we can sort of call those out and ask our guests. The question or a chat just came in that asked when we might estimate when the new chief will be named. And I know that I have worked with developmental associates. I'll maybe give Steve a slight break. And I know we have a calendar of projected dates up on the city's website. So by all means, please go on that website, and we will update it periodically so that we know, and you will know where we are in the process. Steve, I'll let you I'll let you commit to a specific date if you wish. But as I said, obviously this is a very fluid process. Things can change. Even in the best of circumstances, things can change, not to mention the pandemic hopefully winding down, et cetera. What are your thoughts, Stephen?
Well, I want to be a little bit careful because we haven't finalized this with the manager and it's ultimately her call. But I will say, my guesstimate at this point is that we would be evaluating the candidates in those final 5 candidates in the skill assessment around mid-August. There's a lot more involved after that, though, particularly for a police chief, because the city, if they did like they did under Tom Bonfield's leadership, will narrow the number of candidates down to 2 or 3. Those folks will probably have a background investigation before they're invited to come to the city for final interviews. That's an intensive FBI type background investigation, not only looking at criminal history and financial history, but checking references in depth, not just the references supplied by the candidate, but following a chain of references. That typically takes at least 2 weeks. So now we're talking early part of September. They would then come to the city probably middle of September, sometime mid to late September. And then at that point, the manager and her team would make their decision. So I'm guessing probably the 1st of October, the candidate, the police chief for the city will be known. They may well need to give a 30-day notice if they're from outside the organization. So it could be 1st of November or so before that person is actually on board. It takes quite a while. A very careful, thorough process is required.
Thank you. I've asked to put the website back up in the chat, so thank you, Stephen. And we did just put up the website. So again, to keep updated with where we are in the process, by all means, please go back to that website. It's also the exact same website where you can provide any feedback or information that you'd like to submit in the form of those 2 surveys, one in English, one in Spanish. As well as the telephone number that's 919-560-4273. I will say it one more time, whether or not if somebody does want to provide feedback and come up to the mic, all they would need to do is put their name into the chat function here, and we will call on you and have your sort of account unmuted, and then we can have you speak. Right now we have, let's see, I guess we've put that, the website and the web link also in the YouTube chat. So I know we are live streaming on YouTube as we speak. So we are in there as well. And again, the website is posted, as well as the voicemail number that we have for folks who may not want to fill out the survey or may not have a computer at home. Let's see, I don't know if there are any other comments or feedback that I'm seeing. I still don't see any. Let's see. I know Dr. Strauss and his organization, as I said earlier, we did work with both some of the senior executives here at the city to provide feedback as well. Today, and I believe later on this week as well, we are going to be working directly with different folks, different groups of folks within the Durham Police Department as well, to solicit and get feedback on what they are looking. I know Kerr and Pat, I believe you were out there today speaking with different folks. Who were you speaking with today?
Today we had,
sorry, go ahead, Kirk.
go ahead.
We met with the executive command staff, the captains and lieutenants, the sergeants and corporals, and we will meet with officers and the civilian employees as well.
All right. Any words of wisdom that came out of those sessions, or any specific feedback that was of interest to you?
I think we've expressed a lot of the information that particularly about the staffing levels and the pay and the work schedules, just the officers being exhausted mentally, physically, and emotionally, and lack of support. They feel, whether it truly is there or not, they feel a lack of support.
I'll just throw this out too, Jim. I was truly impressed, though. A lot of good people who really are committed to Durham as a city and the police department in particular. And they're wanting to make sure that their voices are heard so that we can get the right person who can give the community what they need and the department what they need. So a lot of good people who are willing to come up and share. Unlike this session, they were very vocal and the conversation went on. But I just applaud the caliber of officer and leader that we talked to today, because it just shows that Durham is still in good hands, and we just need to get a good leader who can continue to lead them in the right direction.
I will say that the staff was very complimentary of Chief Davis and the changes that she has brought about. They just hate that she's leaving so soon.
Great. All right. Thank you. We do have another session tomorrow. Again, we're trying to provide multiple different avenues for people to provide feedback. So we do have another session that is tomorrow. It's at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So again, if you want to provide feedback, of course, you can do that using the Zoom call set up for tomorrow. And again, we do have the true surveys on our website, and we have the phone number where people can submit their feedback. Are there any other sort of comments or feedback that anyone would like to present? If so, please put your name in the chat. Anyone? I do have a comment. From your perspective, what do you think is the most challenging or the hardest part of a search, especially at this level? Being in the human resources section myself, or area myself, and having hired a few people myself, I know that obviously there are parts of the process that are looking at the job description and really tweaking it to exactly what you want and what you might need and what is critical for success in any role. But then it moves on to a sort of a sourcing section or part of this search, of any search, in which you're just accepting resumes, maybe looking at them and screening them. There are usually levels of screening, whittling a candidate pool down to a select few. And then, of course, the final, most of the time it's an interview. In this case, it's a very intensive and in-depth assessment center. What do you find to be the most challenging part of that whole process?
For me, I'm confident enough in our methods that I don't worry about our ability to screen and to evaluate candidates. It's the analogy I always like to use is like fishing, the whole recruitment process. You can have all the best equipment. I'm not a fisherman, by the way. I can never catch any. But when you can have all the best equipment, all the technological bells and whistles that people who are fishing use today, and that doesn't mean you're going to catch any. And so what I always worry about is who are we going to get to apply? You can use all these methods. You can reach out to great folks and so forth, but there's no guarantee that they're going to be interested and they're going to want to be part of the process. So that's always my biggest anxiety, is who's going to apply and are we going to get good quality candidates? If we do that, I feel like the process will be very effective in terms of eliciting the competencies, making sure that they're a good fit with the city of Durham. But we got to get those candidates on board first.
I know, Steve, you and I have worked on other positions. We worked together for Chief Davis, as you said, 5 years ago. And I know I've heard you say this, Durham is a great city that has gotten a lot of great press over the years as far as the growth and some of the absolute wonderful things that we do here in Durham. So sometimes that is a great help in the recruitment process, being able to stand up and say, you know, and be proud to be working in such a great community. So let me see. Trying to think of no other feedback has come in. See, I don't see anything else. I think what I'd like to do now is, because we're getting up at about an hour and 15 minutes or so, and clearly, you know, feedback has not been coming in at the rate that we thought it was going to be. But I do want to thank everybody for those who did provide chats or feedback in the chat or questions in the chat. Again, there are other ways. If tonight wasn't our night and we needed to, and you wanted to provide feedback and maybe you missed the session, these sessions will be recorded or are recorded and will be posted on our website as well. We have those two surveys, again, one in English, one in Spanish. They are both on our website, which the link to our website has been posted in the chat several times. And last but not least, we have a voicemail that we have set up at the City of Durham, 919-560-4273. And again, that you can leave your feedback on that voicemail system in English or in Spanish, and it will be translated and sent over to the good folks at Developmental Associates so they can absorb that feedback and make sure that it is incorporated into the search and the assessment centers that they do so well. Let me see. I believe that will be it for this evening. We will end a little bit early. Again, I want to say thank you to our friends at Developmental Associates for helping us out with this, and for being so kind and so free with your perspective. In particular, Pat and Kerr, who, again, your perspective on this job in particular has just been outstanding. So thank you very much. And again, thank you to the folks who made this Zoom call possible. And I wish you all a very good night.